Welcome to the Midnight Booth. This is a slightly more intimate encounter. If you could all just stop talking.
Yo, yo, yo! There we go.
Okay.
Also wait.
There we go. So, gave a keynote. I wish I had a little bit more than 20 minutes there, but this is going to be a lot of fun. It's a more intimate encounter. We have Eran Barak here. He's a very good friend of mine and the CEO of Midnight. Well, the CEO of Shielded. You got to start using Shielded, right? Yeah.
The DevCo.
Yeah, DevCo. There we go. So, as you probably know who I am, I'd like Eran to spend a few minutes just kind of giving you his background and where he comes from, especially his time at Symphony, and then we'll get into a lively conversation about Midnight and other such things, and if we have a little time, maybe some Q&A. So, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Great meeting you all. Eran Barak, as Charles said, I lead the DevCo for Midnight. Started my career actually as an engineer. Really loved puzzles and crypto and got into all that business. Spent many years in financial services. Really passionate about keeping data protected, and so created a company called Symphony that is actually the world's largest today network connecting financial services and ensuring data and exchanges between banks and financial institutions is encrypted and protected. And then I really got the kind of the crypto bug and was looking to see how can that kind of forward our industry and make things together, and came into contact with Charles and heard about the project Midnight that he's been cultivating since 2019, and I was like, this is it. This is what the world needs. So we'll tell you a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so like all good things, Midnight started in a bar. We were in Israel at Eurocrypt in Tel Aviv, and so I think it was around 2018, and we were shit-faced drunk, and we said, we need to do something like in the privacy space. That's a good idea. I was around a bunch of cryptographers. So of course everybody agreed. They're like, yeah, we definitely need something like that. And it was a really different world back then. Zcash was a relatively new thing. We didn't have the roll-up revolution. We didn't have recursive snarks. We didn't have privacy frameworks. We just knew that there was these things called zero knowledge. And it had come out in the 80s. And there'd been a little bit of progress, but like every paper every now and then at MIT or something like that, but nobody cared. The magic of zero knowledge, though, was that it's really the closest thing we have to like divine revelation. You basically make an assertion, and you're able to prove it to somebody without revealing the underlying information. You say, I'm eligible to drink. Yes or no? Well, I'm not telling you my age. Or I'm a resident of this country. Great, but I'm not telling you who I am or where I live. Or, I'm qualified to be here. It was the craziest thing. If you come to America, we have the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, and they kind of molest you at the airports when you come through. And I was always thinking, gosh, at least one of the people going through this line has like a top secret clearance and lives some sort of Jason Bourne life. And yet this person also has to take their shoes off and get molested. Wouldn't it be nice if they could prove that they're kind of trusted by the United States? We trust you with our nuclear secrets, but we don't know if you're going to bring a pen on the plane with a little knife in it. It's absurd. And the reason we don't do that is we don't have technology to do that. So we were always really interested in zero knowledge technology. But the thing is that there was a world of difference in 2018 from where that was at to where we're at today in 2025. When you look at the volume of publications, the different projects, whether it be Aleo, ZK Sync, Starkware, thousands of these places, all of them, all these protocols, they have embedded within them a lot of really good technology and ideas. And so we had to wayfind and say, well, how do we put this together with Midnight to get it where it needs to go? So let's talk a little bit of kind of the foundations of Midnight. What makes Midnight special?
Well, I'd like to say that when you think about protecting your data, you really need to think about two pieces: protecting the data itself and protecting the metadata. I'll give you examples. Charles was just talking about protecting the data. You could either keep the data off-chain, which is what we usually do today, because blockchain is completely public. or put the data encrypted on chain, and then you've got this whole coordination matters to do, or use zero knowledge, like Charles said, where the data is kept off chain, what we put an attestation about the data on chain. And so let me give you an example from a real world on what kind of zero knowledge that Charles was just talking about. Anybody here know the game Where's Waldo? Ever see that? Right? You got this fantastic page with all these little characters, right? And you need to find this guy Waldo, who's like I don't know, an Italian or something with the stripes. I don't know what this guy's.
He sounds French.
Sounds French. Okay. So what you could do is, if I wanted to prove to Charles that I know where Waldo is, but not actually reveal where Waldo is, I could take a really, really big piece of paper, way bigger than the book, could put a hole in it and put it right on top of Waldo. And so Charles can look over the hole and see that I indeed have found Waldo, but because the paper is way bigger than the page, like the book underneath, he would not know where Waldo is. So I'm able to prove something without actually revealing the underlying data. I think this is a powerful kind of element that enables you to get the utility without forfeiting the privacy or the ownership of the data underneath. So we can prove things like KYC or medical records or financial, let's say, ability to take a loan or things of that nature.
Yeah, and what's crazy about it is there's a lot of things you have to think about. So you can do Where's Waldo, but does that generalize? That was the first major question we had to answer, because how it used to work in the day is you would build your snark, you build your zero knowledge proof for Waldo. And then what happens when we play a different game like Finding Dora, or where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, or where the heck, you guys remember that. But when we want to play these games, well, what if we have to build a completely new system, a new cryptocurrency, a new snark stack? So how do you get between them? You need programmability. So very similar to the early days of crypto, we had Bitcoin script and these quasi-fixed function ledgers, and they give you these amazing abilities to do a set of things. But the minute you wanted to do something more generic, like issue an NFT or create a DEX or do some GameFi thing, it just didn't support it. So then we say, well, give them a programming language. And then once you have a programming language, you can write that up. The question is, how do you use a programming language with a snark stack? So the very first thing we had to do was invent that. It's called Kachina. And it took a few years to kind of figure out the model. And there's been a lot of great ideas like ZEC on the Zcash side. And Aleo has a stack as well. There's a few others. But that in itself was a huge step forward. But then the other problem is that when you have privacy, you also have a concept of disclosure. So you need to have the ability, when somebody enters the network, to make a decision, is it private to them or do they get to see something? So at the very least, you disclose to at least one person, yourself. You'd like to know your own transaction history. You'd like to know your own account balance. So you always have a disclosure of at least one. The question is, how do you go from one to many? So the other thing that had to co-evolve at the same time in the industry was the DID standard. So the decentralized identifier, which started at the W3C in 2013, was really about how do we identify people in an arbitrary way in the blockchain space that's self-sovereign, meaning you own the identity. It's not issued to you by some trusted third party. Not issued to you by some trusted third party. So we figured that out. We said, okay, well, we have this DID thing, and if you embed DIDs and anon-creds and these other techniques in these private smart contracts, then you can program basically any disclosure regime you want. So you become a superset of Monero and Zcash and these other cryptocurrencies, they're disclosure of one. But then you also then cover all these other amazing use cases, for example, like real-world assets. So let's talk about real-world assets a little bit.
What was it, 10 trillion, 13 trillion?
10 to 13 trillion, yeah.
Coming on chain. So the next couple of years, we're going to see a massive movement of real-world assets. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Turn down the gain a little bit. Thank you. Coming on chain, but that's not going to happen unless we protect not just the data about it, but also the metadata. So Charles, we're going to have to explain to them how we solve this unsolvable issue.
Yeah, so with real-world assets, we already have an example. Everybody's used them. It's the killer use case of crypto right now, stablecoins. They're treasuries, they're tokenized treasuries, and they have behind them a governance structure. They have freeze and seize, they have a disclosure regime. Typically there's compliance at the primary issuance redemption side. So that's a real-world asset. It's $250 billion plus, 73% of all economic activity on Ethereum. No one can deny that that's a big thing, and it's a killer thing. And that's just a little taste. When you look at the fixed income securities, when you look at the equity markets, when you look at tokenized real estate, property flows. Here's the thing, let's say you're Snoop Dogg, and you release an outlook, and you have some agreement about how the royalty structure is going to work. Do you want to broadcast to the world how much your royalty structure is to all your competitors and other positions? No. Well, you need privacy with that. Let's say you have to go through compliance to hold a security, and there has to be some understanding from the issuer of that security of who holds it and where are they holding it. Do you want to reveal to the entire world your know their customer and your anti-money laundering and these other things? No. So intrinsically it makes sense that you should be private globally, but then there's some disclosure regime that has to exist with that asset. But we're missing one key thing, and that key thing is you need liquidity. So in addition to having privacy, in addition to having identity and selective disclosure, I would like this to seamlessly be able to move between legacy financial systems like the BlackRocks of the world or the Goldman Sachs or the Morgan Stanleys, or pick your favorite vampire tentacle squid, suspicious octopus monster. I'd like to be able to exist there and then seamlessly move to crypto and go to any ledger it wants and the end user not to care. So for that to work, you have to think a lot about tokenomics. And so let's talk about chain abstraction and tokenomics.
So part of the challenge that we had was we wanted to protect metadata. And you would think maybe that's not that important. But let's say we put medical records on chain, and although you can't see what my doctor is prescribing me, you can actually see that I'm going to the doctor or how frequently I go to the doctor, and that reveals a lot about my health. Or if we have real world assets, you can suddenly see the identity and who's transacting and who's exchanging. You may not see what assets, but you suddenly see, Jamie Dimon suddenly having some real activity with somebody. So we really needed to kind of secure that, but the problem is to do that, you needed to use some asset that would be shielded in terms of paying for the transactions. And that got some chains into a lot of trouble, like Monero and such, because the regulator said, hang on a second, if I take $100 of Monero and I give it to Charles and it's all shielded, haven't you just established money laundering here? So the regulators started getting antsy, and we were under a conundrum. It's damn if you do, damn if you don't. If you shield the token or the asset that is paying for the transaction, then you protect the metadata, but then the regulator gets upset. If you don't protect it. So we were stumped. But what really is there is that you're trying to do too many things with the same asset. It's both the gas fee, the security, the governance, the token that some people may invest to appreciate in value. If you actually separate that into two assets, have one token and one resource, you can actually disambiguate this situation. And you can have kind of a token that everybody can control, buy, sell, have liquidity, to what Charles was saying, and have another asset that is a resource that is shielded and pays just for the transactions. And since you have two separate digital assets, you can put restrictions and covenants on the shielded one that prevents all the things that regulators are antsy about. And suddenly you unlock and figure out how to have the cake and eat it too.
Yeah, it's so cool. So the dual token model is one of the biggest innovations of Midnight. And what's cool about it is that you get your cake and eat it too. So in the regular cryptocurrency world, we like our deflationary Bitcoin. We like our deflationary ADA. And every now and then people pretend to be deflationary, but they're not. So we like these things, people like to trade them. But the problem is that the holder of that kind of has an incentive of long-term appreciation. But then you also have this fuel. And what do you want with the fuel? You want price predictability. You want it to be stable and consistent. You don't want to wake up using Amazon Web Services and say, hey, actually, for the next 2 weeks, your fee is doubled. And then, actually, I got that wrong. The tariffs thing came in, so actually everything's on a discount by 50%. Congratulations. You can't run a business this way. You just can't. And so we can't with a straight face say we're going to replace with Web3 the traditional infrastructure world, but not have price consistency. Here's the other thing. If you have users, if your barrier is that your users have to own and possess crypto to use your application, you're not going to be competitive against Web 2. because they don't have to use a crypto to use Telegram and Facebook and X and these other platforms. They're not going to go from a free permissionless system and that they click a button, they have it, they can use it with sans a sign up, to a system where they have to manage a cryptocurrency wallet and use that. So the dual token model actually solves both of these things at the same time. You can have one asset that represents the control, the governance, the consensus side, and has deflationary monetary policy, which we're all familiar with and we love. Thank you, Bitcoin and ADA. And it's actually going to project value long term. But then you have this other capacity token, and it can have a lot of great privacy characteristics, but using a capacity exchange, the token can reflect intents. So this allows you to either have free transactions if somebody covers them on behalf of the user, or this allows you to pay in any cryptocurrency you want through a capacity exchange. So you can pay in Bitcoin or Ether or Solana or these other things. So if you're a developer in those ecosystems, you say, hang on a second here, I'm bundling Midnight's fee with my network fee, so it's one fee and it's in the same currency. So doesn't this feel like an extension of your infrastructure? You don't notice that you're using a different system. That's how you start getting people to play around. And the cool thing is if Night generates dust, and I get dust from Night, then the Night holder has an incentive to get as many cryptocurrencies as possible to participate and transact on the network because they're the ones providing the dust, and suddenly they get an index of all these cryptocurrencies. You get fees in Bitcoin and Ether and ADA and other such things. That's pretty cool. There's no other asset in crypto that has this type of characteristic. And what's cool about Dust is over time we can learn more about the demand function and supply function of the market, and you have a variable monetary policy on the admission of these things because it's a non-speculative asset. So you can change it all the time based upon the things that are going on inside the network, whereas you never once have to touch the monetary policy of Night. So you get your cake and you get to eat it too. And then when you combine that with the chain abstraction framework, then it's really easy for a developer to be able to write applications because they have a single language, a single state machine, and then it coordinates auto-magically under the hood somehow, some way, how to balance different chains. Not just two, but multiple. So eventually you can imagine a situation where you build infrastructure using Chainlink and Ethereum and Midnight and Cardano, and maybe you put some audit stuff on Bitcoin or these types of things, and you pay in whatever currency you want. And it just works for the consumer. That's what Web 2 taught us. People are simple. They want to click a button, it has to work. Developers are simple. They want to write once, run everywhere. That's the magic of Node. Even though there's better ways of doing things, they use Node for that reason. The same with the JVM, God help us all. It works everywhere. So that was the other major innovation that we brought. So let's imagine the future, Eran, and we say, okay, post-launch, what are some of the things we imagine are going to get built on Midnight, given this paradigm?
Well, we actually opened our testnet and got like over 2,000 applications kind of starting to build various ideas. And the funny thing is because everything is encrypted, we can't actually see what they're doing. So we had to kind of call them in to some DevRel calls and say like, what are you guys up to? And it started from the usual suspects, right? We're building some dark pool kind of management and DeFi apps and some gaming and some medical stuff. There are some guys doing research on Alzheimer's and others doing something with pets, kind of medical for pets. And then it started getting really interesting with new innovation, let's say, around diplomas and credits, which, diploma mill is a big thing, at least in the US. And then got into things that got me started wondering whether we actually know what the true potential is. There's one guy that is building an application to track carbon credits of jet engines being placed in various places. Another person was building something that tracks nuclear reactors, and a third guy was coordinating some drone attack mission stuff. It just got completely out of hand. I think if we finally build and bring blockchain technology that encompasses the privacy elements that businesses need, the innovation is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool is that we just get to see the art of the possible today. But like when Ethereum first launched, we had no conception that we would have the current DeFi ecosystem that we have, the current use cases we have. So when you give people privacy, you give people identity, you give them chain abstraction, they can just do whatever the heck they want to do with it. It's an open system, and there's 1,000 cool things that you can do. And Ron's already mentioned a few, but just some common sense things that actually are pretty hard to solve. Like we have these colossal companies, like Google, for example, and Meta, for example. They make their money from ads. So their entire business model is being this stocky, creepery predator to, looks at you in the window and says, "Hey, would you like to buy this hat? I saw that tattoo on your butt. I think you might like these pants." And sometimes they get it horrifically wrong, like my ass. It does not represent me. Google knows you're pregnant before your parents do. But they get it wrong. And so their entire business model relies on them knowing a scary amount about you. So what if we could live in a world where Google actually doesn't know anything about you? So if you enter in a search in their database and it's John Smith, the query will come back nothing. But then you have some sort of proof system that when John Smith logs in, there's an ad engine that micro-targets you and gives you very relevant, very nice ads. And when you click them, you get some money, and Google gets some money, and everybody's happy. It's a circular economy. This is what Bats is trying to do with Brave. The problem is, trust me, bro. There's always some centralization. There's always some trusted third party. There's always some custodian that kind of has to sort of be involved. And that's one of the reasons why Midnight exists, is that we can go from trust me, bro, to don't trust me. The same for messenger apps. Like, could you build a decentralized Signal, for example?
And you mentioned Google. We are seeing kind of the next space that Google is trying to champion, right? Artificial intelligence, and every other big player is betting on that. Well, research actually showed that back in 2024, AI large language models have exhausted all public information on the public internet is available. You know what they're going after next. They're coming after our private data, right? Because, according to them, that will provide us with a more personalized, more accurate response to our queries that is relevant for us. How are we going to share our private data with AI without forfeiting ownership of all of our private data? One key way to do that is using zero knowledge technology with blockchain, that you can put personal data attestation on chain for an AI to read, and you get all the utility benefits of AI without actually disclosing. Midnight hopes to be the fabric that enables AI to access personal private data in the right way that doesn't violate our rights.
Yeah, especially when we talk about consortia. Google doesn't trust Microsoft, doesn't trust Apple, doesn't trust Amazon, but they kind of sort of have to work together for the good of the ecosystem, their customers, and competitive reasons. So how do they talk to each other without talking to each other? And that's really what that privacy fabric is all about. And as we look to the future, larger and larger parts of our lived experience are going to be moderated by AI and agents, whether it be romantic interest with chatbots. I mean, there's some incredible stuff that's from, never mind. But there's lots of cool stuff that's coming around with all these things. And when you look at them, what's nifty about it is that stuff like Midnight is a necessary thing to happen. It's the only way you can make this work. Because otherwise, you'll live in a zero-trust environment where nobody is going to cooperate, and you end up getting these fragmented silos and a terrible user experience and high operating costs. So you have the right product, that when the product exists, it lowers the operating cost, it gets people naturally talking to each other, everybody just wants to use it and build on top of it, and then ultimately, the technology evolves very rapidly, and there's incentives for the industry to work together. What's cool about Midnight is it's not just one thing. It's a chimera of many different technologies. There's some consensus love from Aptos. There's the parity substrate framework that we used and built on top of. There's a ton of things from Cardano that we took in and dragged in. We learned a lot from the Zcash people, especially with Halo 2. And there's dozens of other ecosystems and ideas. And we just recently joined the Confidential Computing Consortia, with Linux Foundation. And we're right there with Microsoft and Amazon with Nitro. And they're talking about confidential computing and trusted hardware enclaves with GPUs for outsourcing AI data. So Midnight basically clicks into all of those different things, and it gives you the ability to reason and think about How do I share? Who do I share with? What do I own? What do they own? What's the semantical value of the data that I'm sculpting? And then ultimately, what's the marketplace look like? And how do I be an economic agent in that marketplace? And I actually get paid for sharing these things, as opposed to it all goes to the Magnificent Seven and they just tell me what I get.
Indeed. So if you are a competitor, I say come on down, I'll buy you some beer. I'm sure we can do some great stuff together. Midnight kind of values are all about collaboration with the other players in the Web3 community and the Web2 community. I think that if we come together as an industry, we can truly make a change and have the Web2 finally cross the chasm and become one. As you said, no more DeFi or TradFi, just Fi.
Just fine.
Very good.
All right, so since you all took the time to come see us, I'd love to at least take one or two questions from the audience. So does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Yes, sir. Give him the mic.
Thank you, Charles. My name is Roger Tremino from Avenida Crypto. The question I have for you, since you're a leader in the space, is what is your thoughts about the stock market joining blockchain? And what I meant is stocks actually on the blockchain.
That's why we built Midnight. That's why it's here. Because there's no other way to do it. You want to have broker-dealers. You want to have compliance. You want to have well-regulated, well-structured markets. You want to have circuit breakers. But you also want blockchain stuff. So you want 24/7. You want one global market. You want much better price discovery. You want more liquidity. You want the ability to bundle securities. So I'd like to not just have 15 separate assets, but put them all together into one financial relationship. Okay? Well, having infrastructure like Midnight is the only way to really do that, because you have to have a private side. You have to have multiple actors that are allowed to interface with it. You have to have full programmability. You have to have various real-world asset standards. And then also you'd like to trade it across all the different blockchains. And you'd also like to trade it amongst all the legacy exchanges, like the Dow and the NASDAQ and these things, New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ and these things. So I think it's coming. It's a $10+ trillion market opportunity, and that's today. But then it's a $100 trillion opportunity when you look at microcap IPOs, when you look at Africa coming online, South America coming online, Southeast Asia coming online. You have all these amazing sub-billion-dollar companies that would securitize if they were given an opportunity, phenomenal investments. The other thing that nobody talks about is after 2008, we never turned off the money printing machine. So when you look at the global economy, there's too much money floating around. And the worst job in the world is to be the head of the sovereign wealth fund of Norway. Because they're basically coming to you and they're like, okay, you got $2 trillion and you need to get a 9% return. Oh, and by the way, you can't invest in oil, you can't invest in this, you can't invest in this. And it's like, where the fuck do I put $2 trillion? That's the reality that all these funds have. And so when you think about it, you say, oh, okay, well, if I have crypto, and crypto can absorb the traditional finance world, now I have mix and match assets. I can create securities where I can sculpt them in the right way that they can represent the values of the investor. So if you want to do loans, but only give loans to people in sub-Saharan Africa who are women, who are of a particular tribe, who are of a particular income class, and you can put those covenants into the structure itself. You can't do that with legacy finance. Legacy finance, the other side has to predict what you want, issue that asset, and create that market. You can now tell the market what you want. The analogy is like movies. Wouldn't it be super cool if we just tell Hollywood what we want? We're like, okay, we like Top Gun and we like Tom Cruise, but let's put Mel Gibson in and let's do this, and I want the plot to be this way, and we'll give you $100 million if you make the movie. It's like, all right. Instead of getting this nonsense that we get now, So you need to have a structure where the market can tell people what it wants to invest in, how it wants to invest, the return profile it wants to have, and then counterparties can form and figure out how to put those intents together. So it flips the script and it creates global liquidity. The other thing is it creates tariff-free global liquidity that is not subject to geopolitics. We live in an age of great powers conflict, and this is new for all the young people, but if you're a little older like my dad or my grandfather, you're used to great powers conflict. It was the Soviet Union versus the United States. Now it's the United States versus China and Russia. Okay, but what does that mean? Treaties don't mean anything anymore. International trade agreements don't mean anything anymore. Rule of law really doesn't mean anything, because if you have a corporation, you could just wake up And all those things you understood about your intellectual property, your assets, your bank accounts could just disappear overnight. Imagine being a Russian living in Switzerland. And then Russia invades Ukraine, and suddenly just take your bank accounts. They shut your business down. It's your high-risk customer. Sorry, you're gone. Or imagine being an American living in Hong Kong, and China gets angry at you, and they just after 2018, shut you out. Is that a rules-based international order? Can I go appeal to the World Trade Organization, get my money back? No. It's a great powers conflict. But can China order the Bitcoin blockchain to do something? Can America order the Cardano network to do something? No. These networks are above the fray. So if you're an investor, a global businessman, you want the world to work properly, your only place to put money where you still have a rules-based international order is blockchain space. So we have to make the blockchain space suitable for you to put your money there. And that's what we're trying to do with Midnight.
Fantastic. Folks, one more question. Come on down.
Come on down. You're the next contestant on The Eran is Right.
Hi. Hi. My name is Temi, and I have two parts question. So we know about Monero, which is privacy-focused blockchain. How is Midnight different from Monero? And Monero, we know, is like a nightmare for regulators. They don't know how to. So whenever anybody uses Monero, they think you are hiding some stuff.
Yeah.
So, like, for Midnight, how are you regulatory compliant? What do you do in the tech stack to make it like regulatory compliant?
So the worst thing in the world you can do is try to bake into the layer one itself escrow keys for the regulator. The chain is dead on design because who do you give the keys to? Give it to the United States, give it to Russia, give it to China. How is that a global cryptocurrency? So you don't do that. What you do is you bake in the capacity to put disclosure at the smart contract level, and then you let exchanges decide their suitability guidelines on a case-by-case basis. And some jurisdictions like Switzerland are very lax. In some jurisdictions like the Middle East, in particular Saudi Arabia, these things are much more strict. And so you just let the world decide, and the suitability guidelines live there. So selective disclosure is an absolute necessity, and this is what Monero is really missing. They've kind of hodgepodged a few things together, but you need a smart contract system with a DID system, and at the time of construction of the smart contract, then you can put those systems in play. And then when you go to the exchange, you still have travel rule, you still have all these other things, but the difference is you have the ability to prove to them the entire audit trail. So if your intention is to be compliant, you can be compliant. If you're not, well then you lose liquidity. And that's how it should be inside a global marketplace. But you don't make it the network's concern, you put it into the smart contract level, you put it into the DID, and you let the network just run that infrastructure. The other thing is there's a ton of non-financial things. So the very same escrow key that would apply to a financial transaction would then apply to all your supply chains, to your medical records. So when we're going to trust the IRS with your medical records, they're going to know when it burns when you pee. That doesn't really make sense for the IRS. So you need to push it up a stack, and you do it on a DApp by DApp basis, utility by utility basis, and that's one of the core differentiators. Why it wasn't done with Zcash and Monero is that they didn't have the identity infrastructure or programmability at the time Monero was created. It uses ring signatures. Zcash has been upgrading in that direction. So they're adding a framework called ZEXE, and they've been slowly rolling and pushing that out. And then when you combine it with identity, they'll be able to do that. And I think that's the compromise with regulators.
I'll add just one more thing to clarify why we believe this needs to be at a DApp level. Regulation comes at the intersection of three things: the jurisdiction that you're operating, the type of application that you're running, and the audience that you're being serviced. So if you're in China versus US versus UK, you've got different regulations and rules. If you are running an application like Charles was saying about financial versus, let's say, doing some NFT or some game, you may have different rules. If you're servicing an audience that is a regular user versus accredited investors, you got different rules. The blockchain at that layer does not know these details in order to determine what regulation applies in that specific case. It has to be at the DApp level, but you want to have hooks in the blockchain that enables easy development for dApps that want to be compliant with rules to apply what they need to do in order to be compliant and run as they need.
And it creates a nice marketplace for RegTech,
Sure.
because in addition to writing smart contracts for your own application, you can be a meta contract writer and actually write compliance contracts for specific banks, regimes, and other such things. So Kraken can write a contract for what makes it necessary for Kraken to feel comfortable. But Abu Dhabi can do the same at the ADGM level and these types of things. So you start talking to regulators in a different way. You say you're in a global market. How do I move between market to market to market? Here's the thing. I can create a transaction on Bitcoin that by its construction will forever be illegal. You can't do anything about it. You can't stop me, because here's what I can do is I can put addresses in each country and have them be the output of the UTXO graph. So when I send the transaction, there's a North Korean output, an Iranian output, a Russian output, South Korean output, Israeli output, American output. No matter who you are, where you live, there's at least one of those outputs that's illegal, so the whole transaction is illegal. So this shows the problem with modern regulation is that it's not compatible with these programmable systems. So what you need to do is upgrade the thinking a little bit and say settlement needs to be compliance. So when I send the money to you, there should be baked into the transaction and the address criteria what's required for that to settle for that actor. Then you get rid of the suspicious activity report, you get rid of all these retrospectives, you get rid of these giant data warehouses, because they don't work. JP Morgan Chase over the last 20 years paid $19 billion in compliance fines, and they're the largest bank in the world. So you can't argue to me if the largest bank in the world is having to pay $20 billion plus in compliance issues, 19 billion in compliance issues, whatever the hell it is now, that somehow this magical system's great. And by the way, how do I stay in compliance when I don't even know which customers I have to blacklist next year? So, we got Russia invading Ukraine. What happens when the next war breaks out in 12 months or 24 months? What if China attacks Taiwan? And what if India backs China? Then I guess I have to blacklist all my Indian customers now. It's a senseless thing. So you need to have algorithmic regulation systems, and you need to have marketplaces for those, and then you need to push the burden back to the regulator. They've gotten fat and happy screwing us in the private industry. They have this idea of small regulatory body, giant compliance department, the bank, and it does nothing for anybody in the finance world. JP Morgan Chase doesn't want to have to spend $100 billion a year hiring compliance officers. Why should they? Why should we accept laws that force this upon the consumer? If the regulator wants to regulate us, what we should do is say the regulator is liable for writing the smart contracts. And we'll do that. We'll help them write those things, but they're accountable for that. When they update the regulation, they have to update the smart contract. They can't be like, well, it's like obscenity. I'll know when I see it. Am I in compliance? I can't tell you, but if you're not, I'll fine you. That's not an okay system. And what's cool about what's happening right now is there's a global conversation as this hegemony starts breaking down of why the hell are we doing things the way we're doing? Why does BSA exist? Why do these trade agreements exist the way they are? Why does the Treasury Department get to tell somebody in Mauritius how to do business when it's just two people in Mauritius dealing business with each other? This makes no sense. So that's a window for us to have a third option. And that option is selective disclosure, algorithmic governance, settlement is compliance. And what will happen is a lot of these small jurisdictions will start adopting that. And once they do that, business model innovation means trillions of dollars of value will flow into those jurisdictions, and they will become the dominant financial centers, killing New York. This is what happened to London. They were too bureaucratic. We came in, we were the rebels in New York. It's like, yay, America. And so we took it over. And then we got fat and happy. So now it's all open again. In the world of the 21st century, anybody could win. You could wake up in Kenya, could be the largest stock market. In Nairobi, if they have the business model innovation. The ADGM knows this in Abu Dhabi. Nvara knows this in Dubai. Singapore Monetary Authority knows this. FINMA knows this. The US, we're starting to wake up, but we're behind now. And so part of the market restructuring is going to be an acknowledgement of that. And you know what? They can't have it both ways because they've done too much in the last few years, especially with the tariff now. And there's no greater example of that than the tariff on Australia. I'm told by my nation the reason we're doing tariffs is the trade deficit. Well, we have a trade surplus with Australia and a free trade treaty with them, but we put a 10% tariff on them. How does that math work? Under the formula that they proposed, we should actually be subsidizing trade by 10% with Australia, not charging them a 10% tariff. It doesn't make sense. And when you lie to people and when you're dishonest about these things, you lose the moral mandate to lead. And that's an opportunity for the rest of the world to wake up and say, we can do something different. And it's a merger of culture, technology, and ultimately capabilities. And I'd like to live in a world where it's fair, everybody's treated equally, there's consistency and stability. That's why I'm still in the crypto space 15 years later. It's been really hard with all the ups and downs. I remember FTX, and I remember Luna, and BitConnect, and OneCoin, and I remember Mt. Gox. I was around for that. I remember all these things. And there's no reason to stay when it keeps doing this unless there's an overriding principle with everything. So I always start with the principle, and then we figure out how to make the regulation work. I don't start with the regulation and however insane it is and then say, well, how do I create this Frankenstein's monster to comply with this nonsense? So it makes common sense that it should be algorithmic regulation, settlement is compliance, it makes common sense to have selective disclosure, and it makes common sense to tell the regulator, do your fucking job. You write the smart contract. That's what it makes sense to do. That's what we're going to do. And if they don't like it, well, somebody else is going to win.
Fantastic. Folks, we want to thank you for coming. I'm going to hype up the next session because right after us, Maurizio Magaldi, right there, head of product for Midnight, is going to come on and have a quick fireside with Nick. And you get to ask all the difficult questions about, the product and how the things work underneath. Charles, thank you for sharing the stage with me. And folks, have a great day. Enjoy a great show. And I hope you come and build some exciting stuff on Midnight. We would love to interact with you, whatever you are and whatever you're doing. We look forward to working.
Thanks, everybody.